I just finished up my second time through a course called Missionary Pathway. The design of this course is to teach people how to live as missionaries in their everyday communities. When we hear the word missionary, we often think about someone who's going to go to a foreign country or move far away from home to tell people about Jesus. People who do that vocationally or officially in some way. Is that being a missionary? Yes. Is that a good thing? Yes. Is that something that God might ask somebody to do? Absolutely. But the problem with seeing a missionary only that way is it takes the rest of us off the hook. It kind of tells the rest of us that we are not missionaries, that we are maybe not qualified, or we are not included. But Jesus says something completely different. Jesus says, "Come follow me, and I will send you out to fish for people. I will teach you to share the good news about me with your everyday community." Jesus invites all of us who follow him to live as missionaries. And that's what that course, Missionary Pathway, was all about. I just finished it up last week, and it was my second time through the course. And the last spring, when I first started the course, one of the first things they teach you about is to pray for people. And so at that time, I was just praying for this nameless group of people that I had a kind of loose association to. And they were social workers specifically who work with some of the most difficult family situations in our community, particularly with children. And so I just began to pray that God would bless them, that he would bless their work, that he would bless their lives and their relationships and their financial situation. Just bless them in every way. See, I used to be a social worker, and I used to do that hard work with children. And so I naturally care about social workers and the work that they do every day. So I just started praying for them. And then I got a call from a friend. And she said, "Hey, there's one of the social workers wants to talk to a pastor about God. Are you available?" I said, "Yes." And then about a month later, the same friend called me and said, "One of the persons in the office passed away, and they want to do an office memorial service. Would you help with that?" And I was like, "Yeah." And then a couple months later, she called me and said they would like someone to come in once a month, kind of like a chaplain, a couple hours a month, just to sit in the office and be available for any social worker who might want to talk. So I said, yes. And now, instead of praying for a nameless group of people, I pray specifically for 4 people every day, that God would bless their lives, that they would prosper, that they would desire to know him. And it simply started with an openness to being a missionary in my everyday community. My name is Janet. I'm one of the pastors here at Restore, and you're joining us today in our 4th week of a series called Sent. And the purpose of this series is to take us back to the original mission of the church as Jesus designed it to be. See, while Jesus was walking the earth, he gathered his followers, and he spent about 3 years preparing them to spread the news about him, Jesus, to everyone. They were going to spread the news that because of Jesus, people could experience freedom from sin and its consequences. And those followers that Jesus gathered, they became the church. And that now the church's mission is to be sent, to bring the good news of Jesus to all people. "Come follow me," Jesus said, "and I will send you out to fish for people." So in this series, here's what we've learned. I am sent, and you are sent. We've learned that I am on mission, and you are on mission. And we've learned that I am equipped by God, and you are equipped by God. And today's big idea is this: I will find my people. In the second week of this series, we talked about how every Christ follower is called to pastor others. We have the opportunity to show others the goodness of God. And Peter, one of Jesus' original disciples, he writes this as he instructs the new followers of Jesus, those who make up the early church. He says this to him: you are a chosen people. You are royal priests, a holy nation, God's very own possession. And as a result, you can show others the goodness of God. So now the question becomes, if I'm a pastor as a follower of Jesus, if I'm a priest, who are my people? What's my parish? Well, Peter then goes on to say these words, to write these words to those first followers. He said, care for the flock that God has entrusted to you. Watch over it willingly, not grudgingly, not for what you will get out of it, but because you are eager to serve God. So Peter says, care for the flock that God has entrusted you. You know, it's like, what's the flock, right? When I think about flock, I think about a gathering of animals or a flock of birds. Well, the dictionary says that. The dictionary says that a flock is a group of animal or birds that are feeding, resting, and traveling together. So I guess that my flock are the people who I'm eating with, who I'm resting with, and who I'm traveling through this life with. So what's the flock that God's entrusted to me? What's the flock that God's entrusted to you? The first circle of our flock, the very first, is family. So family are our first flock. Those are the people that we're eating with every day, that we're resting with, that we're hanging out with, that we're doing life with. No doubt, the people who have the most influence on us and the people who we have the most influence on are our family. Author and pastor Pete Scazzaro, he says this. He says, Jesus may be in your heart, but grandpa is in your bones. And what he means by that is we are being influenced every day by the generations who have gone before us in all kinds of ways. We're influenced by them, and then we will influence those future generations. I remember hearing this story once about a woman who was cooking pot roast for her family, and she cut off both ends of the pot roast, put it in the pot, and stuck it in the oven. And her husband said, hey, why do you cut off the ends of the pot roast and throw them away? And she said, well, that's how my mom taught me to cook pot roast. That's just what she did, so that's what I do. So at the next family gathering, she said, hey, Mom, why do you cut off the ends of the pot roast? And her mom said, well, that's what my mom did. Your grandma did that, and that's how she taught me how to cook pot roast. So that's what I do. So the next time the woman saw her grandma, she said, hey, Grandma, why do you cut off the ends of the pot roast before you cook it? And she was sure that there was a reason about flavor or tenderness of the meat. And Grandma's like, well, my pot was really small, and the pot roast would never fit. So I cut off the ends and I stuck it in the into the pot so that it would fit. So from how we cook to how we spend our money, to how we deal with relationships and live out our faith, there is nobody who has more influence on us or us on them than our family. Family is where we first experience love and sometimes the lack thereof. Family is where we learn about relationships and how the world operates. Family is probably the place where we experience maybe our very best and highest joy, and it might be the place where we experience our most painful wounds. If we're on mission to love others like Jesus, It starts with how we love our family. Now, next week is Thanksgiving, and you're probably maybe going to see some family members. And maybe you're going to see some family members that it's a little bit difficult to love. It's kind of interesting because I think sometimes we encounter our family and we look right over their heads and we're like, is there somebody else out there that we're called to pastor and love? I'm going to pick someone else. But during this Thanksgiving week, when you come across those difficult people, what would it be like if you just stepped in with love? You know that family member where everyone, it's almost like it's acceptable not to love them, like everyone's sort of winking and rolling their eyes. But what if you stepped in and you show love next week? What would that be like for that family member? What would that be like for the other family members as they watch you love like Jesus? See, being a missionary in our everyday community, it starts with our closest community, and that's our family. And then the second circle of our flock is our friends. So that second layer are those people that we have chosen as friends. Now, Jesus did so much of his life with friends. He did so much. He had those 12 close friends that did everything with him day in and day out. It feels like they did all kinds of stuff together. They were eating together. They were on the boat, out on the water together. They were going places, walking together. They were at a wedding together. Jesus' way of living with his friends was very relational. He had his 12, but then he had his inner circle, Peter, James, and John. They were like his ride or die. These were the guys where the night before Jesus was going to be put to death, he goes to the Garden of Gethsemane, and he takes all of the followers, all of the 12, well, there were 11 at this point because Judas was away getting ready to betray him. He takes the other 11, they go to the garden, and he says to most of them, you sit over here, and then he takes Peter, James, and John, and he said, come with me while I pray. And he went off with those, and he said to them, my soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here with me. Keep watch with me. Jesus was honest. He was open. He shared real stuff with his closest friends. He was not trying to prove anything. He was not trying to convince them of anything. He was real and he told the truth, even when it scared them, even when they didn't like it, even when it was upsetting. He was a real friend to his friends. And it's through these friends that the whole world would hear the news of Jesus. It's through these friends that we now know of Jesus. So the first circle is our family. The second circle is our friends. And now this third circle, this is far. The people who are far from God. See, Jesus always had people that were far from God who were part of his circle. We read about Jesus' encounter with Zacchaeus. Now, Zacchaeus knew that Jesus was walking by. He was a tax collector. In fact, he was the head of all the tax collectors. And he had heard about Jesus, and he knew he was walking by, and he was a little guy, so he climbed up in the tree to make sure that he could see. And he was up in the tree, and Jesus saw him up there, and he looked up and he said, Zacchaeus, I'm going to go to your house today. And then Jesus was criticized for that. They said this about Jesus. They said, well, he's going to be the guest of a sinner. And they judged him for it. And then there was the time that Jesus started a life-changing conversation with a Samaritan woman at a well. Now, on the journey, Jesus walked through Samaria, which was significant because mostly Jews would never walk through Samaria. They would avoid it because Jews didn't like Samaritans. So yes, prejudice and racism has been going on a long time. But he decided to intentionally walk right through Samaria, intentionally, and he started a conversation with a woman. which is also surprising because most men in Jesus' time wouldn't typically engage a woman in a conversation in that type of setting. And the conversation that he had with her, it was so life-changing that the woman runs back to tell her whole community. And then they start telling others about Jesus. Another time, Jesus is in Jerusalem, and he goes by the pool at Bethesda. And at the pool of Bethesda, the people would lay around the pool, people who were blind, or maybe they were invalid in some way, and they would lay around the pool waiting for the waters to be stirred because they believed if they got in the water at the right time, it would heal them. So Jesus comes across the pool, and he sees a man who'd been invalid for 38 years, and he walks over to that man, and he tells him to get up, take up his mat, and walk away, and he heals him. Jesus was so intentional about that particular person, and he walked right over there, and he made a life-changing difference for that one. See, the flock of those far from God was always a priority to Jesus. The question in our lives then becomes, in our everyday communities, who's already there? Who's far from God? Is it somebody in your neighborhood or at your workplace or maybe at your gym or the grocery store or the library, wherever you hang out? Who's far from God? Jesus spent so much time with people far from God that he had a reputation for it. They actually called him a friend of sinners. They called him a drunkard, and they called him a glutton because he was hanging out, eating and drinking with people far from God. So if we're going to live and love like Jesus, if we're going to be missionaries, our flock needs to have some people that are far from God. Okay, so our first circle is our family. Our second circle is our friends. And now this other, and then people far. And now this other one is our favorites. Now you're wondering, oh my goodness, am I allowed to have a favorite? Yes, absolutely. You are allowed to have favorites. God has given you passion and experience for a certain set or group of people, and we're absolutely allowed to have favorites. At the beginning of my vocational work in Chicago, I was working in the support and recovery community. I was working mostly with people who are recovering alcoholics and people who are addicts, people who had gone through the devastation and disappointment of divorce, people who had lost loved ones, people who had been through the childhood trauma and abuse of some kind. And I developed and prepared volunteer leaders to lead specific support and recovery groups. But I had one rule. You couldn't lead a group unless you had had a shared life experience with the people that you were leading. So, for example, if you're going to lead a 12-step group on alcohol recovery, you were a recovering alcoholic. If you were going to lead a divorce care support group, you were a person who had been divorced, and on and on. It's interesting, in the recovery community, they understand what it means to have favorites. When you're part of an Alcoholic Anonymous community, you work the 12 steps. And the final step in the 12 step is this: having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we try to carry this message to alcoholics and practice these principles in all of our affairs. So I have known so many alcoholics and addicts over the years who were really passionate about carrying the message of recovery to other alcoholics and to other addicts, because those were their favorites. I'm reminded of these words of Paul, and we know that in all things God works together for the good of those who love him, who are called according to his purpose. See, God uses our life experiences. He's used our hurts and our hang-ups for the good of the lives of others. That's what redemption looks like. And those people will be our favorites. And that's why my hard years working as a social worker calls me to my favorite community, one of my favorite communities, and that's communities of social workers. So what life circumstance, what experience have you had that leads you to your favorites? God will use you regularly in the lives of others who have similar experiences. So, the flock that God has entrusted to you starts with your family, and then your friends, those who are far from God, and then your favorites. And all of that is your flock, the people that God has entrusted to you. So let's check in with our friends that we've been watching the last few weeks, who are figuring out how to live as missionaries with their flock in their everyday community.
You don't go anywhere where you see anybody ever. It's kind of my favorite color. Pair of glasses.
I wear them until they break, and then I buy them. How did you go about recognizing or identifying the people that God has called you to serve if we're being on mission in our everyday communities?
I think I would say for now it's really organic. So I don't have a specific small group or even a specific person that I'm meeting with every Tuesday of every month or anything like that. So some days it's the people who live inside my house, and like that's my focus. But kind of as of recently, it's been on social media. God affirmed that through maybe I would post something and then there would be people that I didn't even know followed me online that would comment and say like, I really needed that today, or I was having a really bad day and what you said really made a difference for me. And I might be at my kid's school or a social event and somebody's like, I hope you keep doing those videos. And so it's almost like God has used all of those other people to affirm that space of social media for me to keep going.
That's so good. And I appreciate what you're doing there so much, because I think so many times we look at social media and we just think like, oh, it's a dumpster fire, like stay away from it as much as possible. But like, what if more of us were using our social media intentionally to encourage, to inspire? So I really love that, Jenna. Thanks so much for sharing.
There's two things that come to mind for myself, which we've talked about, like wherever your 2 feet are planted. So my neighborhood is a mission field for myself, and I think that's part of the beauty of like we don't all live in the same neighborhood, and God didn't necessarily want us to all live in the same neighborhood, so we can be missionaries in those places. And then the other thing that I think of is like what's breaking my heart, like what do I see that breaks my heart, because that's where I'm gonna have passion for, that's where I'm gonna have a desire to like move into. So for myself, I've talked a lot about like working with international people, and I've seen a lot of people who have come to the States and not known anybody, not known the language, not known how to go to the grocery store and check out at the grocery store, and really simple things like that breaks my heart. And so I want to be able to help in ways like that and share Jesus through those relationships.
One thing that I want to draw out from this group here, would you consider yourself an introvert or an extrovert, Eric?
Myself?
Yeah.
I would say I'm an extrovert, but I would say I'm like an introverted extrovert.
Introverted extrovert. Kenny, how about you?
Well, I'm an extrovert. I think everybody would pretty much figure that one out.
Who would have thought? That's good.
Who would have thought that?
That's
right?
good. That's good. Jenna, how about you? Would you consider yourself an introvert or extrovert?
I'm definitely an introvert.
And here's what I want to draw out is the fact that you're an extroverted introvert, you're a raging extrovert, and an introvert, and God uses all of us in a variety of different ways. It's so cool. Thanks for sharing, guys.
Once again, these words from Peter, written to the early followers of Jesus, those who were forming the first church, he said this: care for the flock that God has entrusted to you. Watch over it willingly, not grudgingly, not for what you will get out of it, but because you are eager to serve God. So here's what I want you to do at home. Find a piece of paper or something that you can write on where you can create your circles, where you can just draw this same diagram and put those words on it: family, friends, far, and favorites. And then what I think would be really helpful is that you write names in those circles, just individual names that are part of those circles in your life. And that becomes the people that you pray prayers of blessing over. Put that somewhere in your kitchen, on your fridge, maybe in your bathroom, on your mirror. Put it somewhere where you can see it regularly and be reminded that you have a flock that God has called you to care for and be a missionary in. Let's pray together. God, I just thank you so much that you have given us a purpose with our lives, that we do have the opportunity to share you with other people. What a blessing and what an honor. God, I just pray that you would guide and lead us and give us wisdom, that we would be able to be a blessing to those around us. We lift this up to you. In Jesus' name.